Can I get a quick mic check from you guys?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
No collusion.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Waxcast. This is episode 36. I am joined today by a new friend of mine, I think I could say, a rabble-rouser, a rebel, and a
co-defendant, potentially.
A potential co-defendant, and a Florida man, most importantly, Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you. I'm a fan of the Waxcast, and so now to be a guest, I could check it off the box.
Well, I'm really glad you came on, because not only am I a fan of your politics, but I'm very much a fan of the fact that you're one of our 12 subscribers. So it's great to have you in person here. We can talk about things we could change, things we can improve on. I know you gave us some Yelp reviews that weren't too great all the time, so we're here to work on that. But I wanted to bring you on most specifically because you've been making a lot of news the past week. I mean, you know how to make news. You know how to grab some headlines. You're an expert in that front. But what you did the past week was you really led the charge against what everyone calls the establishment of the Republican Party, this rotten corpus in D.C. that's basically misdirecting the party and misdirecting the grassroots away from what they really want. And particularly went after Liz Cheney. You flew out to Wyoming, the great state of Wyoming, and you're basically their new adopted son out there. And you got into some flack on Twitter because you went on to another great podcast, War Room with Steve Bannon and Raheem Kassam, and you said we had the votes, but you made it very clear that the establishment is going to pull some tricks and they may be up to something. I wanted to talk about what happened on that fateful day beyond closed doors with a lot of these Republican members of Congress basically going against the wishes of their voters.
Yeah, and what a great place to be here in the Coolidge Library.
Yes.
You know, Coolidge was, I think, famously the president who said that cheap products make cheap men.
That's true.
You know, and also, I think, cast immigration in the right way. That, we don't stop immigration into our country in any circumstance as an affront to other people. We do it because we love what we have so much and we want to protect it. We have an identity crisis right now in the Republican Party. Will we be the party of Trump? Will we be the America First Party? Will we be the party of the working men and women of this country that believes in foreign policy restraint and trade deals that put our people first? Or will we go back to kind of the Bush, Cheney, Romney, globalist, free trade everywhere for the sake of other countries and enriching the elite, invading everywhere, inviting everyone across our borders to suppress wages for the American people? And while throughout the country, I think we're on the right side of that and we're where the energy of the party is, I have to tell you, within the 8 square miles of Washington, D.C., the establishment still has a stranglehold on our politics. And it's an establishment really that is a uniparty. It's the establishment in both parties. We are not in red team versus blue team. It's not that one party's out to get you and the other party's coming to save you. I think, frankly, both parties have been partying on the dime of the American people for far too long and have been doing so in a way that sells out the special nature of America. Now, the most recent, I think, coming to a head of this conflict within our party was dealing with the leadership of Liz Cheney. I do not believe the Republican Party should sound like Liz Cheney. I do not believe that we ought to try to start 10 new wars before lunchtime tomorrow. I do not believe that giving away the farm on trade inures to the benefit of our workers and our long-term success. So I have a political disagreement with her. There are many in our conference who were offended at the style of her leadership, not just the substance of her arguments, but this very kind of in-your-face negativity toward President Trump really throughout his presidency. And there are a lot of folks who resented that. But when you have the full leadership team confronted with the possibility that someone might be removed, that's very threatening to them, right? If you're in leadership, in any of the positions, you want to believe that you can never be dislodged. And what I'm here to tell you is that Kevin McCarthy went all in for Liz Cheney. When there was an expectation that folks might want to make a change, Kevin stood up in that conference meeting and basically put his name on the line and said, if you believe in me, you'll believe in Liz Cheney, you'll believe in the full leadership team, and you won't make a change.
So he whipped for her. He really did.
Oh, he did everything to utilize his political capital for her benefit. Now, I don't think there's a whole lot of love lost between Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney, but it shows you how the establishment deals with kind of an uprising in the energy of the party with the people who would like to see, I think, our congressional delegation more representative of where our people are.
Right. Now, do you think the mechanics of it with the whole secret ballot behind closed doors, we don't know where specific representatives voted unless they came out and said it. Do you think that played a massive role in the results?
Oh, sure. It's always easier to be with the establishment when you think no one's looking.
Right.
Like, that's why so much of what happens in Washington is kind of concealed through these bizarre procedures, right? They don't want the American people to see who's benefiting and really how the decision process is being made.
Were you surprised by? I mean, you were there. I mean, if you want to name names, you could name names. But were you surprised by some individuals, some of your colleagues, in terms of how they voted, either for or against?
Well, I always like to let my colleagues speak for themselves. I'm not a spokesperson for any other member, but I think we've got a more important kind of question to ask, which is that which direction will this party go, and then what are the consequences, Gavin, when the leadership of the party, when the elected representatives really aren't in touch with the energy and the enthusiasm. I mean, you lead this very interesting, dynamic, active club here.
Motley crew.
Yes, you live, I would call them the island of misfit toys, but you actually have really assembled like this group of patriots who are eager to be in the battle for our country, to ensure that our people live better lives. And then, you have to interact with those grassroots impulses and desires to see their effort paid off in the representative work of the people who serve in Congress and the Senate and who are our national figures around the country. And I am concerned that if we continue to see those in Washington bear hug the Liz Cheneys of the world, tolerate kind of the weak leadership that we've seen for far too long, and I'm not talking about even just our current crowd. I mean, I'm going back to Paul Ryan, John Boehner. I mean, these were people who were not America First Republicans. Right. They just weren't, right? And so if we continue to see that divide, what are the long-term consequences for the health of our party?
So do you think that this establishment is basically more beholden to the donors, the donor class, than they are anything in the grassroots, and that's why they're operating in this fashion, which on paper would seem to be a little counterproductive to getting reelected? Well,
counterproductive maybe to that, but I think there's an important means to that end that is driving the thinking of the establishment today. If you want to know what the number one motivation is in Washington on the Republican side right now, follow the money. And what you see is an evaporation of these Fortune 100 companies donating their special interest PAC dollars to the Republicans that do their bidding and hope to serve as their valets. Like, I used to think that, well, there's some Republican special interests and some Democrat special interests, and ours are probably better than theirs. So if you got both sides selling out, you at least want to be on our side. The reality is both parties are kind of working for the corporate elite in this country. And who wins and loses elections doesn't always really dictate where the power is, because both political parties are wanting to serve as the valets to the special interests. Well, now you've got companies like Disney, Microsoft, Google, so many others saying that they're not going to donate to Republicans who expressed their concerns over election integrity by voting against the certification of some of these electors. They're going to withhold those political resources. So we're on this conference call with the Republican leadership, and their message to all of us is, don't worry, they'll come to their senses. These big corporate conglomerates will eventually realize that life will be pretty bad for them under the Woketopians, and so they'll donate to us again. And, my perspective is that we should have said, don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. Right. And your money's no good with us. And if the Democrats want to whore out to corporate America, let them. And we could go fight for the working people of the country, and there are more of us than there are of them. And that's ultimately the way we retake power. But my perspective is not the majority perspective. Look, I'm in the minority of the minority in Congress because I want to tell the PACs to go to hell. Right. I want to jettison this late 90s, early 2000s neocon conservatism. And I want to take the energy of the Trump presidency and I want to build out a model where we can execute on that. I mean, look, the reason we didn't realize the full benefit of the Trump presidency I think can be found in some of the HR failures, whether that's like the Jeff Sessions thing.
Personnel is policy.
Totally. And I think that, President Trump has shown us the vision on how to win. And I think the next iteration of Trumpism...
Refined.
Exactly. It has to be refined with a focus on developing and curating talent that could go into the government and bend the bureaucracy to the America First vision.
That's a great point, because there really wasn't any institutional framework for this America First populist kind of agenda that Trump had. That he had to hire from, the think tanks. He had to hire from the RNC. He had to hire a lot of these guys that were totally opposed to his agenda and his constituents. But would you say that long term we're probably moving in the right direction if this money from corporate America dries up? And I mean, they're thinking short term. They're thinking maybe too positively that it's going to come back. I don't think it's ever going to come back. Doesn't this set the stage for the eventual, populist revolution in our party where, more Matt Gaetzes are filling in seats in places like Wyoming and less Liz Cheney's?
Well, we're only moving in the right direction if we ultimately come to the realization that we're done being corporate America's bitch. And I don't know that we've come to that realization yet. I mean, as I see my colleagues, they're sort of on bended knees saying, pretty please, corporate America, what Trumpists do we have to purge? What language do we have to reappropriate? Oh, do we have to stop saying America first? Remember when that was a thing?
Right.
Like getting rid of all that in our foreign policy doctrine? Do we have to find people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and, sacrifice them on the altar of the Woketopia in order to be able to move forward? And I think that what too many moderates and establishment figures don't realize is that the cancel culture will never be full. They will always be hungry for the next victim. And, look, if you look at this impeachment we're in, I mean, isn't it ultimately just kind of an exercise in the cancel culture? I mean, Trump's dad played golf in Florida, but it's not enough that he's gone, right? They have to cancel him. Let's assume that were to prevail. What's next? Are we going to go and impeach, Thomas Jefferson because he was a slave owner? Do we have to go and impeach Abraham Lincoln because he had intemperate views on race?
You're giving great ideas to your fellow committee members. Maybe Nadler will take up that next crusade.
You know what? Maybe I need to go and file articles of impeachment against LBJ. I mean, if we're going to impeach former presidents, why don't we go to the real SOBs?
Right. No, I think that's actually a great move. I mean, we have to beat them at their own game because they're ruthless. They know how to play this dirty game of politics. They know how to effectuate their policies when they're in power. They know how to, ram home a message. And it just seems that most Republicans are just used to losing gracefully. And they just want to bow out. They just want to be liked. They want to be polite. And they don't have that grit that Trump had to fight back. So maybe, you kind of maybe said it in passing as a joke, but maybe honestly, if they're going to impeach a former president, why not take it a step further and impeach a former president who is now deceased?
Yeah, I mean, because it's utterly ridiculous, right? I mean, there are real people in this country who actually deserve a serious government, right? That will focus on their needs. We're in a pandemic. We have these tyrants at the state and local level crushing people's businesses. And it is mean and it is un-American what we see. And it would be, I think, critically important for us as a movement to stake our ground around freedom and the notion that we're going to trust the people of our country to make these decisions. I'm a Florida man, as you know. I'm very proud of our governor, Ron DeSantis. I think he staked his political future on this notion that we are not going to just hand the freedom of our fellow citizens over to the Dr. Fauci's of the world. We're going to actually apply some common sense to the choices we make in government to vindicate our people.
Well, speaking of you being a Florida man, some news came out, I think, a few hours ago that the Biden administration was planning to maybe restrict some domestic travel in between states due to COVID. They say mutations, the Florida strain, is getting out of hand, and they actually want to purposely target Florida and shut down maybe some, or at least, hinder some travel to that state. I mean, do you think this is the federal government punishing your home state for basically being, a free country in their own right?
I think that the ire directed at the state of Florida from the White House is largely animated by the realization that Ron DeSantis would be the strongest 2024 candidate, not named Trump, in a race against, the current occupant of the Oval Office. And I think they know that, and I think they're trying to hit DeSantis early and often, but he's a pretty resilient cat, so I think we'll be fine in Florida. Nobody in Florida, by the way, is saying, what we really want? More lockdowns. It would be great in Florida if we looked more like New Jersey, which, by the way, I think one of the last times we hung out, I got uninvited from the state of New Jersey because I dared to show up and give a political speech. Now, if I'd have shown up with a cinder block to go throw through a 7-Eleven storefront, that would have been deemed appropriate political speech. But because I wanted to talk about freedom and the importance of protecting American values, apparently that was just so impolitic.
Well, that would put you on a no-fly list maybe in a few months, so you should probably be careful with next political speeches.
And
in
you
New
know, because you were there, that I was the only one defending New Jersey. All you New Yorkers were over there like, oh, we're in New Jersey. I mean, it was like you all had hitched up and got on the Oregon Trail, for goodness sakes. And I'm like, the view's nice. I kind of like Jersey, and I'm the one that gets banned.
That is true. I have to say, you did stand up for that wretched state over the river. But, to each their own. We have our own rivalries. I'm sure, you guys aren't fans of Alabama.
Georgia.
Georgia. Is it Georgia?
No, yeah. Well, especially, Georgia has already been stealing our water that flows into North Florida, and now they're stealing our freaking elections.
This is old world type of politics.
Well, right. It's one thing to pollute the water flowing into my state. It's quite another to pollute the ballot pool, so the person who won a vast majority of the votes of the actual people who showed up in person somewhere doesn't get the electors from your state.
Well, it seems like Florida, all the issues that Florida faced 20 years ago when we had, the hanging chads and all that, you guys are now the benchmark for election integrity. You guys are shifting to the right, if anything. Georgia used to be a state that would always be to the right of Florida. Does it have to do with maybe the ridiculous film subsidies that they gave out, that they just dished out to everyone? So let's move Hollywood into Atlanta. That'll be great. But that's like self-destructive Republican policies. And you're seeing in a place like Texas, they're welcoming in big tech to Austin. That's going to shift the state blue. Florida, and then I think it was the mayor of Miami actually got in trouble. He got attacked because he was also trying to welcome in big tech into Miami. What do you make of this kind of like self-defeating republicanism?
Well, our key import in Florida are boomers. We import boomers like nobody's business. We're essentially God's waiting room in the state of Florida. And it is a state that's getting more and more red because there's a lot of political refugees who do not want to continue to pay oppressive taxes in the Northeast and in the Midwest. And Florida, we got a great climate. We have had unified Republican control of our government since 1996. Oh, wow. And that has resulted in lower taxes, protection of the environment, right-sized regulations, and a pretty great quality of life. And so we're proud of this.
Half my club moved down there, so that's definitely a confirmed fact. But you mentioned unified government in Florida. It looks like you guys are going to be the first state in the nation to basically take on big tech. This stuff has to happen at the state and local level. We lost all control of Congress at the federal level. So where else but these state governments? DeSantis put out a proposal. What did you make of it? You support it?
I think that the essential ingredient of the DeSantis proposal to go after big tech from the state and local government vantage point is the divesting of our state pension plan in these big tech platforms that engage in censorship. Right, that ultimately can impact stock value and market cap.
That's what the left does.
Right, and so if they're going to make the decision that people are not going to be able to speak freely on their platforms and they're going to target conservatives, then maybe conservative states should not have the pension funds of our firefighters and our teachers investing in big tech anymore. If they're going to be America last, why should America's working class continue to invest in them?
No, it's a great proposal. Now, another resident of Florida, a new resident, is the former resident of this great borough of Manhattan, New York County, Donald J. Trump, former president. He is now living in Florida as a Florida man. I don't know if he could become a Florida man. You'd have to explain Florida man philosophy to me and how it develops if you move there.
It's all about whether or not you know how to run from an alligator. Because if you run in a straight line, an alligator can actually run 20 miles an hour. So if you know to zigzag in any sort of reptile pursuit scenario, then you get your Florida man card.
If I had to bet, I don't see him having that mobility that would be necessary. So we'll have to, table the discussion on him being a Florida man. But what's he doing? What's his next moves? You seem to have got along with him pretty well, and you to your credit, you voted against him when you had principles that you wanted to stick to, whether it was the war powers resolutions and things like that. You had no problem standing up to him being a principled vote. Cheney wants to go out there and talk about the principle, but you actually stood for your principles. So, and you got lambasted for it, but you still maintain a good relationship with them. Have you spoken to him? What's the vibe you're getting? Is he just kind of waiting and seeing?
Yeah, he is building anticipation right now for the relaunch. It's not dissimilar to the time period between seasons of The Apprentice, where there is a lot of speculation and interest in his next move. I believe that the main goal of Donald Trump's post-presidency will be fighting the cancel culture. I believe the next round of billionaires in this country will be the people who figure out how to create resiliency to the cancel culture, how to scale that, and then how to uncancel people, like the 45th president of the United States, who I think is like the most banned man in America right now.
He's unpersoned, almost Stalin-like. But you mentioned like this new class of billionaires, almost like a new elite. I think Darren Beatty talks a lot about that. I think he's also a Florida man that you're familiar with. He talks about having to create a new elite. That you can't just have this pure grassroots working class energy. You need someone with financial resources and intellect to really propel it for political change. Do you agree with that kind of thesis?
I don't think we have to be against elites in America. It would just be nice if our elites were pro-America, right? I mean, wasn't this great country built on people, many of whom were New Yorkers,
yes,
who were, kind of robber barons in their own way, but robber barons with a patriotic spirit, all to make the country greater at some level and to expand the promise of our country. Now I feel like our elites in Silicon Valley don't really root for the success of the nation to the same degree that we saw in generations past. So, I do believe we need more patriotic people at every level of the intellectual and social business stratosphere, because that will enrich our movement.
We can't retreat into these sort of ideological ghettos, so to speak. We can't just say, we're going to have our own conservative little safe spaces. We need to actively engage in academia and the financial world and media. Otherwise, we're just going to give them everything. I mean, they basically have every institution. Is that what you're saying?
Well, right. But then, do you decamp from those institutions that have been taken over by the left, right? And, I struggle with this. Like, every time I tweet, I think to myself, I'm creating content for a company that hates me, that has shadow banned me.
Some great content.
That is, thank you, that is ripped. Well, you know how dedicated and vicious my trolls are, because I do retweet you, and then you get a steady dose of hate that follows.
Yes.
But, the problem is that if we just decamp from that, we do lose the ability to sharpen steel on steel. I still do a lot of hostile media interviews. I'll go on the mainstream media, even though I know I may be drawing viewers to their network, because I want to make sure that the people that are on those platforms at least hear a perspective that is held by tens of millions of Americans and that I think is right for the country.
How do you describe your politics? Because you're kind of an enigma to some people, because, even to me, because, sometimes you have these libertarian views, sometimes you're more in line with this America First populist view. I mean, you're kind of all over the place in a good way. There was an article that came out recently that said the rise of the barstool conservative. And, they had Dave Portnoy on as the main pitcher. And a lot of people have been talking about, Portnoy and, the barstool kind of theme being just people want to have fun, people who want to enjoy life and are not into this craziness that's just sort of developed. It's kind of the thing that everyone could have agreed with maybe 20, 30 years ago. I mean, how do you label yourself? Would you go with the barstool conservative label?
I call myself a libertarian-ish populist.
Libertarian, that's very flaky. That's all over the place.
That's, but I do believe that government does most things poorly. And that is where my libertarianism is rooted. I think that these government-sponsored enterprises set up quicksand for people to fail in. But at the same time, the libertarians kind of think that America is this great idea, but it's more than that to me. America is our home. It's not just a
real
constitution. People. Yeah, this is where we live, right? And so where the libertarians might be a little more accepting of just trusting that big business will do the right thing, on the environment, for example. Just like I wouldn't let anybody walk into my home and trash the place and leave, I don't think that as America First leaders, we ought to accept big business polluting our streams and our rivers and our air for their benefit, not really for ours. So, I have a little bit of that bull moose populism that interacts with my libertarianism.
Well, it's reemerging in the party. I think a lot of this return to maybe Teddy Roosevelt-style politics has been good for the party. I think we've kind of, we've sort of, I love Reagan, but they've sort of propped up Reagan, and they've just used him and his image and his legacy to just propel their own politics. It's largely corporatism. And maybe 30 years ago, if the major corporate boardrooms were still largely pro-American, patriotic individuals, that would be okay, but they're not. Like you said, they're Silicon Valley kind of globalists. They're not really people who are interested in, helping this country rather than themselves. But do you think that's the way the party should really remold themselves, kind of like a Teddy Roosevelt, kind of a bull moose type of individual?
Yeah,
I don't know if there's bull mooses in Florida, but...
You look, I think that President Trump created realignment around a focused foreign policy, around right-sizing immigration so that we weren't just selling out to big business by letting everybody in, and on trade. And those realignments are under assault right now in our party. There's a reason we were doing the things that were different than Trump before Trump came around, and it's because that's what the donor class wanted. And like those people didn't go away when Trump became president. They kind of had to retreat a little bit, but now they're back on the march. They're on offense. I mean, we're putting troops back into northeast Syria right now. We're leading a coalition effort into freaking Syria. Like, where are the Americans that are like, you know what, we're not involved in enough? The Syrian civil war. Like, could most Americans even point to Syria on a map? And so I am concerned. And what I worry about most is that people will lose their vigor for politics altogether if they don't feel like they have a home in either party. And then we create an ecosystem where the establishment is very likely to succeed. So if you're an America First populist, if you view yourself more as a Trump supporter than a Republican, we need you to stay engaged. We need you to still fly that MAGA flag at full mast, because there is a serious effort underway right now in Washington, D.C. to purge Trumpism, to put some heads on stakes of people who back the president, and then to try to redefine the Republican Party in a way that will depress our people and the enthusiasm that is necessary to come back and win.
So have some of these views that you're espousing right now, whether it's kind of like this environmentalism or this non-interventionism, has that won you friends across the aisle? Because there was a movie about you, and it was basically you and Thomas Massey over like a beer cooler, and you guys were like the two friends in D.C. together. What about on the other aisle? Do you have a few other people that you could look to and be like, I could work with them, that we see eye to eye? I mean, maybe a Tulsi, formally.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard was a good friend of mine. We were on the Armed Services Committee, and it was at times very unpopular because the Armed Services Committee in a lot of ways is the war committee. And so you're kind of the turd in the punch bowl if you're against the wars and you're on the war committee. It's like the people that are on the trade committees are for trade. The people that are on the infrastructure committees are for infrastructure spending. The people that are on the agriculture committee vote for the farm bill. So we had a special kinship there, but I think we played an important role asking the tough questions and ensuring that that there wasn't this fervor to have our military overextended, overdeployed in this low-yield state of conflict that the military-industrial complex benefits off of, but that results in real damage in communities like mine where we have a high military population. I would say the friendship I have that would surprise most people is I'm not unfriendly with New York's own Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah, that might make a little news, but actually I don't believe in deplatforming people because they hold views that I don't hold. With almost anyone except Adam Schiff, I would be willing to sit down and say, okay, well, like there's a ton of shit we don't agree on. Like, what do we agree on? And can we start with that and try to maybe build some positive momentum? So for AOC and I, that was drugs. She and I have legislation together that would democratize more research access to psilocybin, MDMA. I care about it a lot because veterans who come back with severe PTSD today are getting loaded up with these like barbiturates and these cocktails of narcotics
and all that.
Oh yeah, I mean it just like zaps so many people of like their will to live, and it creates all kind of family conflict. They become
That's big pharma right there.
And there are people who benefit off of microdosing some of these kind of less traditional drugs. And if there's a way to research that, like I'm for research. I'm from the pro-science wing of the Republican Party. I believe in data. I believe we should apply the scientific method, and I think we should liberate ourselves from the dogmas of the past if there are ways that drugs can help people.
Well, we need more of that in D.C. because I feel like a lot of people, look, I don't agree with AOC on a lot of things, but I always felt like a lot of Republicans take cheap shots at her. Oh, you're a bartender, you're a waitress. I mean, that's not how you win working class voters. That's not how you build any sort of bonds across the aisle. And you're working with her on something that could be a very positive policy development. Why throw that in the trash just because you don't like her? So that's admirable, and that's great to hear. So what's the future hold for Mr. Gaetz? I mean, I'm definitely gonna fluff your ego up a bit here and say when I heard you give a speech in that great state of New Jersey, it was you could hear a pin drop in the room. It was a fantastic speech. It's something you don't really see a lot from a lot of Republicans, institutional Republicans, electeds. They don't have that kind of that charisma. They don't really have that presence that can really win over a room. There's a lot of commentators that have it that are not politicians. Trump had it, and he wasn't a traditional politician. And then, we talk about people like DeSantis and Hawley and all these different names for 2024. None of them really have that sort of presence and that ability to connect and give a really rousing speech. So are we just going to let that Floridian Cicero thing just die, or where's next for you? Where do you go from here?
I never thought I would be here, so I try not to predict too far in the future. But I am convinced that we need a reformation in our church before we're going to be able to proselytize politically. I do not believe that in the coming days and weeks and even months, our biggest fight is going to be against the Democrats. I think within the Republican Party, we have to anchor these values and these policies that President Trump championed and that inure to the benefit of so many of our fellow Americans. That's the fight I want to win. What does the Republican Party stand for? Because everybody wants to talk about winning the majority back in 2022, and I want to win it back too, but I want to be worthy of that majority. And I worry right now with like 2/3 of my Republican colleagues saying, well, we do believe Liz Cheney ought to speak with us, that we might not have the team right now that is in fact worthy of that victory. And so I'm going to do what I can to try to inspire candidates for Congress that want to stand with me, with the group of us like Jim Jordan and Thomas Massie, who can at times disagree on matters of substance, but who aren't sellouts and who aren't just going to kind of hand the calendar to the leadership, the vote card to K Street, and then wonder when the next embassy party gets hosted. So that's very important, and that's a battle that we absolutely have to win. And I think that it's going to require an inspiration with our people to just stay engaged, because you see it. There is such a concern over where the Democrats are bringing the country and where the Republicans aren't fighting back enough. I worry about all the deplorables who might just say, politics isn't for me, and like we can't win without the energy of this party.
No, I love that. I mean, I was hoping you were going to say you're going to run for governor of Wyoming, because I know you have a big fan base.
Hey,
out
listen,
there now.
by the time I'm done, they're going to think I'm running for mayor of Cheyenne out there.
not a bad spot to be in, to be mayor. Quick question, maybe some quick hits, terms of questions.
Lightning round.
Does Jim Jordan own a blazer?
He owns one because house rules require it on the floor, but it does not get a whole lot of use. I also believe Jim Jordan only owns 3 ties.
Okay.
If you ever see like him with a 4th, let me know.
I will keep an eye out for that.
A simple man, but with a brilliant mind.
Got it. And do you think that Thomas Massie is actually Buddy Holly?
Thomas Massie is possibly the weirdest man in Congress. But we need more weird people. Maybe Congress is so boring because it's an institution filled with so many
make
old
Austin
bores.
Weird, make Congress weird. Is that what you're trying to say?
Listen, I'm here for those who are brilliant and different and who have perspective that might not be exactly in line with the former Chamber of Commerce president. We need that in the party because, we're not just representatives. We are representative of the people. And hey, look, we got some weird people out in the country. They deserve members of Congress too.
Have you ever fought with an alligator?
I have not fought with an alligator. I have been like on the wrong end of an alligator pursuit. And really, you want to be able to get up a tree, ideally, in that circumstance. But now we have bear in Florida as well, and our bear are very good climbers. So you don't want to mix your alligator strategy and your bear strategy.
Got it. It's good to differentiate, diversify your portfolio there. And then I guess we'll end off here with, so what is up with Florida? As a New Yorker, I have a lot of questions. We see them, I open the New York Post and like half of the post is dedicated to some strange man in the parking lot of a Kmart, shooting off fireworks and beating up old ladies. Like, it seems like there's a trend in Florida with the Florida man. You're a Florida man. What is in the water? What's going on down there? Is this just propaganda?
Everything kind of goes in Florida, and people come there with different dreams, ambitions. We also have a very low per capita funding for mental health, which we should work on and definitely improve. But yeah, in New York, you can't really get outside and be super weird all the time because it's freaking cold, right? But in Florida, you always have the ability to kind of get out and be a little weird.
Got it. And also, no more run-ins with Jersey officials, right?
So far, I have not been contacted by New Jersey law enforcement. But, here we are, not wearing masks, so we might have the de Blasio force on us.
Well, Murphy I think his election is coming up this year, and you already have experience campaigning in Wyoming. Maybe you should go campaign in New Jersey. It could be something.
I tell you, you know what? The people of Jersey are great people, and I can't believe that they want a governor that bosses them around so much. Every person I know from Jersey does not like getting bossed around.
Well, they're all in Florida now. That's why they say that. But anyway, this has been a great episode of the Waxcast. I'm really glad you came on the show here in the Coolidge Library in an undisclosed location. But I hope we can have you back in New York sometime soon, host you again. You're always a great time to be around. Party animal, so to speak. We have the pictures from our last gala to prove it. I guess I mean, everyone knows how to follow you, but I feel like I still have to do this. Where can the other 12 members of the podcast that are listening right now follow you, check out your stuff, and keep track of your latest endeavors?
MattGaetz.com is our website. Folks that sign up there will know where I am, what I'm doing, and how they can contribute to the cause. I'm the only Republican that doesn't take PAC money, and so it's really important for me to get folks invested in my political message and what we're trying to do to hold Republicans accountable, to shape the vision of what is still, I think, the enduring and great movement in our politics, and that's the America First movement.
Amen, man. Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right, we'll have you back soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you.